What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stucky.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. I'm your host, Roberto Arguello, and I'm excited to be joined by Spencer Aguiar this week as we break down the Wyndham Championship, the final regular season event on the PGA Tour, coming to you from Greensboro, North Carolina at Sedgefield Country Club, where, if you haven't checked, there's a tropical storm that's going to be there on Thursday and Friday, expected to drop over 5 inches of rain. So we're going to get into our betting cards for the week, how we're betting with the increased uncertainty this week. But before we get into our outright cards, our placement bets, our one and done picks, and rapid fire, Spencer, what is your best bet for the Wyndham Championship this week?
I'm going to go with Eric Cole minus 105 over Justin Rose inside the head-to-head market.
All right, Justin Rose, huge performance for him at the Open Championship, nearly won, but Spencer's not afraid to fade him this week. For my best bet, I'm going to go back to the top 40 market with Chandler Phillips at plus 225. Love him on a club down course. But before Chandler Phillips, Spencer, why are you backing Eric Cole over Justin Rose?
So I do very quickly want to talk about the weather. Like we can discuss this more when we get to the course breakdown, because I ran my model two different ways. The first way was just who are the best players in my model. When I ran it the second way, there are players like an Eric Cole who do see a marginal decrease. If this ends up becoming lift clean in place over the opening two rounds, over all 4 days, whatever it ends up being here, Cole's inability to find fairways does hurt the profile ever so slightly. But where I am heading in this direction here goes back to this market overcorrection piece that I always discuss. And I think we have a market overcorrection that has happened on both sides of the aisle here. You look at Justin Rose, there's been one good showing from him, which he got at the Open Championship, which you just talked about. He almost took down that title, but it's quickly eliminated this run that hadn't seen him surpass 68th place in his previous 4 appearances. And it's not as if the form was necessarily all that great even before that. He's been extremely hit and miss this season. He's a top 10 in an additional major, a bunch of missed cuts that have been thrown into the mix. I know a lot of people out there want to look at the Donald Ross history that he has. That's going to include 2 top 10 showings at Sedgefield over the last, I guess since 2009, if you want to look at it there. But this is not necessarily the same stature of a golfer when he got those top 10 finishes in 2009 and 2021. And in fact, when you dive a little bit deeper into the numbers, Rose has barely teed it up at Donald Ross properties the past handful of seasons. So that is where the overcorrection lands on the one end of the aisle. And then if you want to flip it to where Cole becomes one of the best values in my sheet, and that joins Ben Griffin, who I'll talk about a little bit later, you get a venue here that is one of those prototypical tracks that you should expect guys like Cole and Griffin to find success. You look at what Cole has done this season. He has his breaking out party last season as a 30-something-year-old rookie. He wins Rookie of the Year honors. He finds himself into this spot to where 2024 has these massive expectations of what everybody's expecting from him. And really, it's been nothing but one bad result after one bad result up until recently. Now, the form has turned around a little bit, and that's part of the promising end of it. But I'll talk about Cole a little bit more because I don't want to steal the thunder from the outright ticket that I also have on him, because I think there are about 2 or 3 very interesting marks that I want everybody to keep in mind that will even play for this wager here of why his game is as ideally suited as I've been talking about it being for Sedgefield. So I'll save that for a little bit deeper into the show. It's a fade against Rose. It's a play on Cole. And there's a lot of data points that are pointing in the favor of really liking Eric Cole this week.
I am tempted to do another fade of someone who finished in the top 5 of the Open Championship, but we'll get to that later. Haven't placed that bet, but would love to hear Spencer's thoughts on it, as I do not have a matchup bet on my card. But my best bet this week is Chandler Phillips, top 40 plus 225. One of my earlier best bets of the season was a similar bet, top 40 on Chandler Phillips. I think it was around plus 300, plus 330 for him to be a top 40 at the Valspar Championship. And the handicap this week is very similar. And of course, he finished in the top 5 of that event. Chandler Phillips, the driver is the weakest club in his bag. He's not a big guy, and he doesn't hit the ball super far, and he's not as accurate as some of the elite plotters on the PGA Tour. But what he is elite at is his short iron play. He's second in proximity from 125 to 150 yards on the PGA Tour. This week, there are going to be a lot of these short to medium length par 4s. And Spencer, per your sheet, he's 8th in the field in weighted par 4 scoring from 400 to 450 yards. He's 12th overall in your expected proximity. So all these factors with his irons and on these shortish par 4s are big green lights for me. I like that his form has been good, but not great over the last few weeks. He missed the cut at the 3M Open in his most recent start, missed the cut at the Genesis Scottish Open, and those missed cuts happened by a total of 3 shots. Before that, at the John Deere Classic and the Rocket Mortgage Classic, those are driver-heavy courses. He made the cut at both, did not finish in the top 40. But before that, the last 2 times he played on club down courses were the Canadian Open and the Charles Schwab Challenge, really more so the Charles Schwab Challenge than the Canadian Open, and he finished in the top 15 in each of those 2 events. I like when we get the driver out of Chandler Phillips' hand. That's why we targeted him at the Valspar Championship. I like a similar recipe here where his putting, which is really strong, is gained in 6 straight events, can flourish along with his short irons. And with these wider fairways, I think they help him as well. And if you look at his driving accuracy, each of the last 2 events, although they were both miscuts, at least 12% above the field average in driving accuracy, and his 2 best results in terms of strokes gained off the tee. So if there is some more coming together with his driving, I think that gives him even more upside than just his top 40. But I really like his recipe for thriving once he gets an iron in his hand and gets off the tee. So I like Chandler Phillips at plus 225 for top 40, and I bet him down to around plus 190 in this top 40 market. Spencer, important part of our handicap this week is the weather. Unfortunately, we took a more measured approach last week with the Olympics. I think we, and by we, I mean you, had a great call with John Rahm. Really bad beat with him being 4 up with 8 holes left to play. I think you have the distinct honor of being on the 2 worst beats in outrights on the PGA Tour this year with Rory and John Rahm. Rory, of course, being at the U.S. Open. But we're going to look to bounce back here with the Wyndham Championship. How are you modeling the course this week, and how are you factoring in the potential tropical storm, which is going to be around? And by the way, you mentioned there might be ball in hand on Thursday, Friday. I would be shocked if there's not ball in hand on Thursday and Friday, and probably Saturday at the very least as well.
Yeah, my projection would be that this may end up being all 4 days with that. So, when I talk about the Eric Cole answer, even Ben Griffin, who I've now discussed many times on this show, those are players that are not necessarily as accurate off the tee, and finding fairways will be very important here. Now, I didn't want to run a model that was so overly punishing in a lot of those areas. So I talked about it with the Cole feature that we just discussed. I built a model that ran it where it looks a little bit into the weather. I ran a secondary model that ended up looking at putting the ball in hand, being able to place it. How did that factor in for players that had to have a little bit more of an emphasis that would come into play for missed cut penalties? And it's a very small margin. You do see a name like Eric Cole drift down the sheet in the wrong direction ever so slightly, but it almost feels like one of those situations, Roberto, where, I gave this argument yesterday inside of an article, and I think it's worth discussing just here very quickly here. So we get a course here where it's one of the most predictive on the PGA Tour when it comes to rollover predictability. Players that play well here tend to do it year after year. The positive part of that answer is That means we're going to have a lot of data to be able to pull from. That's always a good thing. On the flip side of that equation, you run into this equation here where there is this really, books have the potential when they have more data to be able to price things out in a way to where either one, they're going to have better prices, or two, they're going to be more conservative in their pricing. And if you look specifically at what has happened in the head-to-head market, credit to Bet365. Like, this is almost a common answer that I could give every single week, where Bet365 has the best head-to-head prices. They have the best placement bets that you can find on the board with the odds. They also were one of the only books that actually released head-to-head matchups yesterday. And I really think that, part of it might be because of the weather. Let's figure out what's going on. The secondary reason is there are a lot of similar answers that are hitting the market from people that are producing podcasts like this one, people that are writing articles. We all know that you need to find fairways. You have this market that is going to be looking for golfers that are good from 125 plus yards. You have a really high GIR percentage. You get Bermuda greens, which is the one corollary trend here that's going to be a little bit different from what we've seen recently. But anytime that you get these expectations from books playing things more conservatively, I always find that to be difficult. So I built all of that in my model. It's kind of the core weight of what it's going to be, which is why if you look at my model from top to bottom, it's very in alignment with a lot of names like Sung Jae and Harmon and a lot of these names that are the big market movers on Monday, that whether it ends up being the right or wrong decision, bettors both sharp and frankly probably square in a lot of these spots are ending up on the same wagers, which is just adding a little bit extra exposure to these books. I went through and I tried to figure out past what Sedgefield was, could I put any comp courses on it? And this is not something that I normally do. I always talk about course-specific answers that I'm looking for. One of the things I never run in my model is the comp courses, because I think every venue is different from the next one. And I think when you get too stuck in the comp course answer, you end up building an exact prototype of, like the two courses for me this week that I really found a lot of similarities in when I went through the data: Harbor Town, Sea Island, a lot of these club down sort of properties where the potential for weather comes into play. You have a lot of similarities in the expectations of what you're trying to see there. That gave me a marginally different outlook within my model, I thought, just because I had a 10% weight there. But then you add in the Ross design, where we talk about Ross quite frequently on this show. It feels like a lot of tournaments end up playing on his properties. Small greens, all the undulation that we talk about every week, height and three-putt avoidance. Now, the height and three-putt avoidance, the one thing I will say to that is we usually get a pretty speedy test. If all the rain makes this slower, at least even if it's a smaller percentage, I don't want to get overly caught in that speedy test with it. So I looked a little bit more for Bermuda. I looked at similar green complexes to where we're hitting, 70+% of greens in regulation, and players that are able to make putts from certain requirements that I'm looking for. But one of the things I noticed, and I've talked about this the last handful of weeks even, there have been these tournaments where there is a specific skill set needed, where to me here, when we move over to Bermuda now, there are players that are better expected Bermuda putters than they would be on any other surface. And we have seen this quite frequently recently, where there are names when you throw them on the right surface, all of a sudden you get an expected increase in their projection. Like even somebody like Lucas Glover last year, which, Glover had a little bit of a spike there for a short period of time where the putter got better. But even somebody like him, specifically on a Bermuda surface, had an increased projection based off of what his baseline results were. Outside of the top 130 going into that event last year, climbed inside the top 60 for expected putting on similar green complexes. So, a lot of that for me isn't going to take me off of names in the head-to-head market, any of these placement wagers, but there wasn't I don't want to say too much weight attached to putting, but a lot of weight more so than I normally would on these specific Bermuda green complexes. And anybody who had that negative trajectory in my sheet for putting on Bermuda greens ended up getting removed from the equation in the outright market. So specifically, I'll give you a name that I really like this week, just so like I don't say words that don't have an answer that's attached to it. My model loved Aaron Rye. When he opened at 40-1, I thought he was one of the best bets on the board. Number one player in my model in recent trending form. And even if you look at what he's done in the last 6 months, let's call it, he's one of legitimately the best players on the PGA Tour in the way that he's producing strokes gained. He had a negative return in my model in expected putting on a Bermuda surface. Now, is he a better player than he was the last time or the last couple times he's faced a Bermuda surface? Maybe. But we're also looking at a golfer that if you look at any of the recent putting metrics, he's number one in my model in recent putting. So if there's a negative expectation that occurred for somebody like him, I ended up removing him from the outright card just because, as we say every single week, Roberto, we can't bet everybody, unfortunately, and you have to pick and choose your choices here. I like Aaron Rye. That's not meant to be me dissuading anybody from going down that route, but more so it's that like Jonathan Vegas discussion of a couple weeks ago where there are players that my model likes. If Aaron Rye wins this golf tournament, I'm not going to be shocked, but I did want a player that projected to be a better putter on this surface. And all these names that you're going to hear from me when we get to the outright market, they're going to fit that mold over and over again.
I know that Aaron Rye made a putting change a couple months ago, which has really helped him out. He just hasn't really been on a Bermuda surface maybe since the US Open.
And that's fair.
I wanted to touch on the Donald Ross with you because the Donald Ross courses that they played on the PGA Tour recently, the Rocket Mortgage Classic, and then the US Open, I think are pretty different tracks here, at least off the tee specifically. So are you using more of those around the green and putting type results from those events? I know that Rocket Mortgage Classic is on pure bent grass, so it's very different than the Bermuda surface this week.
I didn't use there's a 10% weight in my model for all Donald Ross courses. I didn't run it from the major championship. I removed that one from the mix and I took the last 24 rounds, excluding that one. Everything else doesn't just take the prototypical Donald Ross answer. So like when I built it, and a really good way to explain that is if you look at the weighted strokes gained total in my model, which is going to be heavily geared towards this Donald Ross expectation, but for this course specifically. So there's a 3% increase in dispersion of scoring importance that's going to come off the tee. But that also comes from players that can find the short grass off the tee. I want accuracy players. There is a specific build here for this course of why when we talk about the rollover predictability that comes into account, there's 8 holes on the par 4s that go between 400 to 450 yards. That is the reason why we get this expected output from the same proximity ranges over and over again. And it's the reason why I keep going back to books have a little bit more data on their hands with it. And the same answer comes into play. This is not a DFS show, but DFS ownership is going to land in a lot of the same areas because we are able to know what sort of a game type finds success out here. And so when I run something that is weighted strokes gained total inside my model, there's a 30% weight of my statistical profile. I'm taking the expected proximity ranges specifically for this course. I'm taking the expected putting specifically for this course. I'm taking the off the tee data that is going to be more geared towards this course. It's not going to be a specific answer, but it's definitely more geared towards that. And then around the green, the way that I run around the green is a lot different than most people. I take a long-term sample size with it, and I normally don't go through and make as many advanced changes as I do with the other categories. The one time that I would make more of a change is if I was trying to reduce the impact of around the green, or I was trying to add in, like here, for example, because so many greens and regulations are hit, I did include a very small percentage, even if it's not quote unquote around the green, in 3-putt avoidance. So that's going to give me the players that are not only hitting the surface and then trying not to 3-putt, but there is a weight in my model that is a very rudimentary approach of these have been the best around the green players. The only time that I really deviate from that answer is when we have abnormal expectations that are thrown into the mix. There's undulation here. That is not an abnormal expectation. If anything, the core answer of what I should expect around the green probably is over a 2-year sample size of just find me the players that are best suited to gain strokes in that area.
Also wanted to note, Spencer, that not only Lucas Glover, but also both of our best bets this week, Chandler Phillips and Eric Cole, all guys who grew up on Bermuda grass. So I think that's something important to note. And on one hand, I didn't weigh around the green that heavily this week. I weighed it less than I would on a normal golf course. But I'm also want to be cautious because if these guys end up having to play through a bunch of rain and wind, then obviously the green regulation rate is going to go down. I just think that if there's rain, there's going to be lightning in the area, and it's going to be tough to play through that. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. So this week, I only have one golfer on my card in the outright market. I've been very conservative. I'm betting guys at super long odds. Well, one guy at super long odds in the outright market, and I'm betting other golfers in mostly the top 40 market with a plus and a crooked number in front of their names, because even if they get the wrong side of the wave, I don't think their chances will be completely ended, which is why I'm targeting top 40s instead of top 10s and outright wins right now until we get some more certainty. But I'll talk about some other guys that I think would potentially be on my card. I think we're going to have some overlap. So I think it should be a fun discussion, and I'll cede the floor to you first because you have a full outright card this week.
I do. I'm starting to build a pretty full card in general for a tournament that has weather problems. So, I mean, it's at least something to temper expectations and just be aware of the weather. Like, I'm going to take the value where I see it based off of all these answers. But, I've gotten responses from people already just with talking about plays. They don't want exposure to this tournament. And as we talk about on this show, always go where you think you have an advantage in the market. When we talk about advantages in the market, though, which is a pretty good segue into this answer here of where I'm starting at the top of the board, I have been very forthcoming on a lot of these shows. When you look at, I think Colin Morikawa at the US Open would be the prime example of this. I ended up betting Xander Schauffele over him in that tournament for this specific reason. But what has happened a lot this season is there are golfers like Morikawa at the US Open where their price gets released into the market and they're 14-1 to win the golf tournament after being 25-1 the week before that. And you get these market overcorrections, which is, the word of the day, I guess, that I'm going with right now, that end up occurring. And I was expecting a very similar expectation to occur for Sungjae Im. Look at the recent form, look at the course history. You have marks here of 5 top 12 finishes since the Memorial for Sungjae. A course history rank that marked him with an average finish on the leaderboard of 11th through his last 5 appearances at Sedgefield, and then a statistical profile that saw him grade inside of the top 10 of all 7 categories that I weighed. I expected all of those factors to put Sungjae in a range where this opened, and I know numbers move, unfortunately, but I expected this to put him into a range where he was going to be 12, 13, 14-1. He opened at 17-1 on Bet365. I released that. It was inside the enhanced market. I released that over at Action Network yesterday in the best bets file that we had for the outright market. You can still find 16-1 out there if you shop around. I just think that this is one of those situations to where he is the cream of the crop here. He is the best name in the field. And for whatever the reason is, and my theory behind the reason would be he hasn't won a golf tournament since 2021. So there's almost been this stigma that's been attached to him in the market that whether shops are not afraid of him or shops didn't think that the public were going to back him at the rate that they did, Sungjae has been a wildly popular name. A lot of times you see these bets come in and it's very easy to figure out what the sharp versus square money is. And I'd like to think every single time my money enters a book, it's sharp money, at least according to my model it ends up being. But look, there are bets where you read the board wrong and you end up on the square side of something. I don't think that's the case here. My numbers believe that Sungjae Im is going to win this golf tournament, and anything over 14-1 is going to be value for me. But Sungjae has been the most bet on golfer this week for all the reasons I've talked about. The form looks great. The course history is immaculate. And a lot of times the players who win this tournament carry this exact profile that Sungjae has. So I think Sungjae probably ends up being your winner. If it's not Sungjae, though, here's where the rest of my complete card comes in. Some of these numbers have moved more than others. I bet Brian Harman at 40-1. Best you can find now is 32-1 at Bet365. The most intriguing thing about Harman's profile is if you run it specifically in my model, the par 5 scoring leaves a ton to be desired on any generic course on tour. Where I was the most intrigued is in his last 28 attempts of playing these 2 par 5 holes, he's birdied them 79% of the time. He clearly sees something on these holes that he doesn't get most of the times when he plays these par 5s. And then you get these high-end marks in my model where he's inside of the top 2 for projection at easy scoring courses, expected strokes gain total for this property. All the high-end, high upside marks that I'm looking for in the outright market, Harman checks all the boxes there. This isn't necessarily a safe profile. I think the floor has some question marks, maybe not to the point where I'm expecting him to implode, but he does have that negative trajectory mark for safety versus upside. In an upside market at 40-1, thought that was one of the best values on the board. He was my second implied probability win candidate when I ran numbers. And even at that 32-1 price that you can still get over at Bet365, I thought there was a little bit value in that price. I took Christian Bezaden out at 45-1. That also, unfortunately, has moved. That's more down in the 35-1 range now. Also, best price available at Bet365. It's kind of the thing, Roberto. Like we discuss this every single week. Bet365 is going to give you the best end of most of these matchups, outrights, placements, and that's why we love them as much as we do on this show.
I think it's always at least competitive, if not the best.
Always right up there. There never is an outlandish difference with it. And I guess the one concern I have with Bezaden out at this 35-1 number is that, one, I don't think this is as big of a concern as the rest of the market. He is coming over from France, so he has travel wear that's going to weigh on him. Two, he hasn't necessarily been the highest upside candidate when you put him at some of these birdie fests. Like there's been a cap ceiling of his production to reach a total to win a golf tournament. And for me, that's probably why Bezaden hasn't gotten himself across the finish line in a lot of these opportunities. I think he's a different player this year. The weighted proximity numbers have completely turned around anything that I had gotten from him in the past when I went and I backtested what my model thought of Bezaden out at this tournament over the past 3 or 4 iterations of it. I don't love the 35-1 number now. This was a much different bet at 45-1. I'm not going to talk anybody out of it at 35-1 because I technically still think you have a little value, but I just want to preface that by saying that is also coming from a very aggressive model of mine with Bezaden out that had him as the number 1 projected strokes gain total performer in this field. You give that output in my model in the most impactful category, it's always going to weigh heavily in the upside ability that you're going to have in my sheet. So I took Bezaden out at that price. I talked about Eric Cole previously. I got him at 70-1. My model has been coming around on what we've gotten from him recently. He's an extremely intriguing buy low candidate. He wins Rookie of the Year honors last year, starts the season off as cold as possible. But if you look at him specifically for this venue and why Sedgefield might be the ideal fit, 4th for weighted strokes gain total, 7th when faced with a Donald Ross venue. That is an important one. And then 17th for expected proximity. I know that you hear that 17th place for expected proximity after I've talked about Sung Jae and Harman and all these top 5 and these top 10 grades. And you hear that number and you don't necessarily think, well, like, oh, okay, he's 17th. Like, why is that so important? The reason why that's important is because that 17th place grade is better than his 54th place expectation elsewhere. And then if you take the expectation that my model has for GIR percentage, he's 135th at any generic course. And he jumps to 15th in my model specifically for this venue. So this is a golfer who is trending in the right direction. I know all the off the tee problems that we can discuss for why that could end up rearing its ugly head for him at this event. Even last season, Eric Cole wasn't gaining off the tee during any of these events and still finding himself working up the leaderboard. So I thought Cole value-wise was the best target at 70-1. I'm really intrigued about what he does because he does jump to 43rd in my model for fairways gained at similar courses. That's better than a projection that's outside of the top 100 elsewhere. I think this is an opportunity for Eric Cole that you can get on the low with him, whether it's in the matchup market against Justin Rose or inside of the outright bet here at 70-1. And then the last ticket that I punched, I took Ben Silverman at 225 to 1. I'll let you guess, Roberto, of where that bet is at this moment. It's usually bet 365 inside the enhanced market for any of these long shots, but 8 made cuts in a row. He's produced 7 of those finishes inside the top 40 of the field. I'd probably argue that he works best as a top 40 wager for that reason, but I decided to shoot for the upside here because this was the most mispriced golfer technically that I had on the board. Maybe not necessarily from the win equity answer, but definitely from where he is in comparison to a lot of other players. And I didn't see a matchup that I wanted to attack, and that's where I was hoping I could get to. But that top 40 range inside that 2 to 1 section, a lot to like with that bet right there.
You've got a lot of golfers I want to touch on, but I'll pick up right where you left off with Ben Silverman. He's my favorite golfer in the market this week. He is the only outright bet I've punched, so I know exactly where that 225 to 1 came from on bet 365. It's still there. I've seen it down to 120 to 1 on some other books. So major discrepancy there, which you don't see very often at 100 spots from 225 to 120. I waffled with having that as my best bet I waffled with him at plus 225 as my best bet for a top 40. But before we got on the air, I saw that it had moved to plus 200. So I didn't want to give a stale bet there. But I love that one. I'd probably bet it down to plus 150. He's in great form right now. And looking at his overall game, well, in a top 40 market, you want guys who aren't going to make mistakes. You want somebody who you know has a really good chance of making the weekend. Well, guess who ranks first in this field in bogey avoidance? It's Ben Silverman. In strokes gained total, I was surprised to see that he's 28th for the entire season on the PGA Tour out of everybody, not just the people in this field. He's gained strokes in all 4 major strokes gained categories. He's above average, slightly off the tee on approach and around the green, but he is an elite putter, gaining over a half stroke per round, which ranks 14th on the PGA Tour this year. In par 5 scoring average, he's 5th in par 4 scoring average, which is going to be key this week. As Spencer noted, there are only 2 par 5s. He's 5th on the entire PGA Tour in par 4 scoring average, which leads this field in par 3 scoring average. He's 20th on tour, which is 9th in this field. His driving accuracy is 46, so above average, about 200 players in that category, but he's 14th in distance from the edge of the fairway. And with, as we've noted, it's Bermuda grass this week, and the Bermuda rough is more penal than most other roughs because of how uncertain you might be. And even though it's not long this week, relatively, it's just long enough that the ball will fall to the bottom, and it's going to be tough to play, especially with the rough being thicker because of the rain in the area, and there's going to be a little bit less spin as the ball comes out from there. So I like all those factors. He's playing great golf recently, with a surge in form, and he's somebody that we've noted is kind of a late bloomer and didn't play a golf tournament until he was 16 years old, shot over 110 in that. After high school, he wanted to pursue being a professional golfer, but he wasn't even a single digit handicap. I think he was a 12. And so he got down to a 2 handicap after he took a year off, then went to an NAIA school, I believe, and played there on a team with like 30 golfers, which there normally isn't 30 golfers on a team. You can only play 5 at a time. And so eventually he works his way up to a low Division 1. His parents don't know much about golf. He convinces them to help him out and to believe in him. And now here he is on the PGA Tour. He made it about a decade ago onto the PGA Tour and has been fighting his way back. He's become a much more fit, much more mentally prepared golfer. And I think everything's just really coming together for him. He's, as we noted, top 30 in strokes gained total. So everything in his bag is really firing on all cylinders right now. There's no huge weakness in his game. He's made the cut in 8 straight events, as you mentioned, Spencer, and all 8 of those, in 7 of those 8, he's finished in the top 40. So I love this top 40 bet at plus 225, now plus 200. I bet it down to plus 150. I think there's a lot of reasons to like Ben Silverman. You noted the 2 guys who I'm most excited to bet on in the outright market once I have some more certainty surrounding the weather. I agree. Sungjae Im is in a tier of his own in this tournament, which is why I'm going to play him for when I'm done, because the 2 other guys ahead of me don't have him. So I know I can be in the driver's seat there, but the driver's seat has not worked well for me. He might have the highest floor in this field, but he also might have the highest ceiling. And outside of when Scotty Scheffler's in the field, that doesn't, or Xander Schauffele, that doesn't really happen that often, especially in these lower events that are non-signature events. So I really like that for Sungjae Im. I felt like a couple weeks ago when Davis Thompson was in the field at the John Deere Classic, you can make an argument for him being there, but the price didn't reflect that, which is why I bet him. Sungjae Im at now a market best price. Well, you said 16 to 1's out there. So 16 to 1. I didn't want to fire on him with the uncertainty with the weather, but if I knew that the weather wasn't a factor, I would have a ticket on Sungjae Im already. I love him this week. I love Brian Harman, the iron play upside, the elite accuracy off the tee gives him an advantage. And I think it's important to look at. You noted that you don't always look at comp courses. I like to look at comp aspects, at least off the tee, where everybody is starting from the same spot, obviously, off the tee. And Brian Harman, not normally very long on courses where everybody's saying driver. But when other courses, he is allowed to hit driver where other guys are hitting 3-woods, and he can control that dispersion. And the driver is super forgiving, especially with him. I like that he can be aggressive to conservative targets off the tee. And I think this is a circumstance just like that, just like last year at Royal Liverpool. And I love his upside with the irons, and I love the upside with the putter. We're not necessarily betting on safe players in the in the outright market. And as you noted, he's not the safest, but I love his upside. So even at 32 to 1, I'm still very much in the mix of adding him to my card. Those are the two guys that stood out to me the most in the outright market. I'm also intrigued by Davis Thompson. I've noted it on the podcast all year. Very bullish on him as a young golfer. I expected him to be in the 25 to 1 range this week. I don't know that it's the best fit for him, but as far as upside goes, Sungjae Im might be the only person with more upside in this field. I really like Davis Thompson. Haven't punched a ticket on him in any market this week, but I am very much considering it. I think a matchup, if we could find the right guy, would be very intriguing as well. But the driver is a big weapon for him, and that's going to be taken out of his hands to a certain degree this week. But another guy who grew up in the South should be comfortable on Bermuda grass. I'm very intrigued by him. I think his number's too long in general, although I don't love the course fit. I think it's a decent, I think any course with 18 golf holes is going to be a great course fit for Davis Thompson. Some other guys I was intrigued by. Robert McIntyre is 60 to 1.
I don't think I'm going to bet him to win outright because he is very putter and driver reliant, and the driver's going to be taken out of his hands this week to a certain degree. So I heard people like Will Zalator saying he might only hit 5 drivers per day. So I dislike that for Robert McIntyre. Maybe he's somebody who could be a DFS answer to a certain degree. I would have to double check his pricing, but I'm intrigued on him as a contrarian play at some point, but I don't think I'm going to bet him in the outright market. Harris English at 60 to 1, I think is very intriguing. It's not a totally different course from the Travelers, which is a place where Harris English has had a lot of success. Short irons, putting, if he can find the fairways, he'll be in great shape there. I think he's got a lot of upside, and I know that our buddy Nick Bretwich is on that. So I'm intrigued by him. Potentially, if there's a wave advantage, I would be interested in Harris English. Some other guys whom I think are just too long, even though I don't necessarily trust their form. Adam Shank's 175 to 1. He could be a total shot in the dark in some markets. His putter has surprisingly gone super cold this year, but it's been, he showed signs of life in his last start at the 3M Open. He had lost strokes with his putter in 7 straight, including some really, really ugly events. And he also had some really, really ugly outputs in that span with his irons as well. He missed the cut at the John Deere Classic and the Open, but he gained significantly with his irons, over a stroke per round on approach in each of those. But once again, he missed the cut. So he's somebody I'm keeping an eye on. I don't know when we're going to have a chance to play him because he's 78th in the FedEx Cup standings. So if he doesn't make the top 70, he's not going to be playable for the next month. But maybe he's somebody that we come back on in the FedEx Cup fall, because I think he's got too much upside and he's just been playing really poorly. So I'm intrigued by Adam Shank. Got to call a few of his shots on our feature group coverage on PGA Tour Live throughout this year, and he's been flip-flopping around with putters quite frequently. His has done a weird thing where he kind of like looks over, like while he's standing over the ball, he looks over at his line. And I've just never seen anybody do that. I think our walkers have also been confounded by that as well. But Adam Schenk is somebody who can heat up with his irons and with his putter. Last year, he finished in a tie for 9th at the Tour Championship. So he's a guy who can get hot. And if he does make the playoffs, I think the FedEx St. Jude will be a really good fit for him. So I'm keeping an eye on Adam Schenk. Not sure if I'm going to be able to bet him this week, but I'm keeping tags on him. And then Michael Thorbjornsen, PGA Tour U, valedictorian, his teammate on the Stanford golf team, Carl Phillips. Shout out to Koala Carl. He won on the Corn Ferry Tour last week. Tremendous story. First off, shout out to Golf Channel for covering the Utah Championship last week on the Corn Ferry Tour. Love that we got to see Corn Ferry Tour guys. Shout out to Shane Bacon and James Nitties, Amelia Miliancho. They're great coverage. But Carl Phillips, short aside here, he needed to make, I think, a par or bogey on the last hole of the NCAA National Championships to get full-time status on the Corn Ferry Tour, or at least starts the rest of the season. He makes bogey, has to go in through Monday qualifying to get starts on the Corn Ferry Tour, does it, places well enough in the top 25 at his first event to get a start the next week, then get a start the next week, then he finishes in tie for second last week, and then he wins this week. He will likely be on the PGA Tour next year with Michael Thorbjornsen. But Thorbjornsen is the guy who finished first in the PGA Tour U. He has a ton of upside. We already saw him tie for second at the John Deere Classic. And once again, I want, like McIntyre, to target him on a course where he can use that elite length to his advantage. So I don't know that this week will be the perfect opportunity for that, but maybe a top 10 or top 20 play could be sneaky for Thorbjornsen. I know he's got the back injury that he's not going to be 100% on for a little while, but he's somebody also to keep tabs on. Maybe we just target him in Napa in a month or two, or in a month. Next up, Chandler Phillips, 225 to 1. Already discussed why I like him. Haven't bet him yet, but if he's on the right side of the draw, I think I could pull the trigger. I can see the upside being there. But once again, my only outright so far has been Ben Silverman. And actually, no, I have a second one. I have added Nick Taylor, 110 to 1. This is not for those who spook easily. He has been in awful form recently. If you would have told me after he won at the Phoenix Open earlier this year that he wouldn't be on the President's Cup team in his homeland of Canada, I would have thought you were crazy. Well, he hasn't done anything of note recently. In his last 8 starts, no top 25 finishes, but I have found some reason for optimism because he's a golfer who is very streaky. He is streaky with his irons and he gets streaky with his putter. And right now, he's in a lull with the putter. As we noted, lost strokes with the putter in each of his last 7 starts, and a lot of them have been pretty ugly. But with his irons, he's gained at least 0.85 shots per round with his irons in 3 of the last 4 events, gained with his irons in 5 of his last 6. Around the green, he has really been solid recently, he was a very minimal loss last week at the Olympics, but before that, he gained significantly in 6 straight events around the green. He is somebody who, when he's playing at his best, it's going to hit fairways. He has pretty high upside with his irons, and he has a really high upside with his putter. He could finish dead last this week, but I think that at 110 to 1, without the top tier talent, especially if Sungjae Im gets wiped out in the wrong wave, hopefully not for Spencer, it's going to be wide open. And Nick Taylor at 110 to 1, I think has some significant upside. It's probably pushing it too far down the board, but I think a top 10, which the best in the market right now with ties paid in full, is plus 750 at Bet365. I'm going to lock that one in. I'm going to sprinkle that one, just a tiny sprinkle, and I'll keep an eye on the top 20 odds as well. But I think that Nick Taylor is going to come around sooner than later. For him, it's like I said, that 2-pronged approach, the streakiness with the irons and the putter. The irons are coming around. It's a question of when the putter will come around. I don't think you want to bet him in any safety markets, but for upside, I like Nick Taylor. Maybe he could be a sprinkle in a GPP as well. And that is my top 10 / outright bet on Taylor at 110 to 1. Spencer, I wanted to get into my matchup bet and another top 40 bet that I'm considering on a golfer who is surging. I don't want to buy at the top of the market on him though. But before then, I wanted to give a quick reminder that Links and Locks is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. All right, Spencer, my matchup bet that I'm considering is Aaron Rye plus 105 over Billy Horschel. I think Billy Horschel has been pushed into a tier that he wouldn't have been given his tie for second at the Open Championship. I just think that in terms of pure upside, Billy Ho probably has more upside than Aaron Rye. But in terms of safety, I love Aaron Rye. I think you have both these guys in the top 10 of your safety. So that stood out to me, which is why I didn't punch a ticket. But I thought that at plus 105 with Aaron Rye, somebody who I know is going to be playing from the fairway consistently, the putter has improved significantly given some changes that he's made to his game, and his iron play is solid. I think of Billy Horschel as more of a streaky player who can get on a roll and catch absolute fire, but I know what I'm going to get from Aaron Rye on a week-to-week basis, and Billy Horschel, not as much. Any thoughts on that matchup?
I mean, I think you're on the right side of the plus 105 number. As a pure number grab, if we're just trying to grab value in the space, I would say that you are correct. For me, though, this is essentially a minus 105 plus 105 sort of matchup. It just should be flipped of who the plus 105 is. So, I mean, if you want to say there's 10 points of value based off of that for Rye, I think that that makes sense. It's probably too thin for me, though, value-wise, to want to jump in the fray on that. But, you know, it's interesting. I was trying to figure out a way, and I also didn't figure out the answer, which is a little bit different from the route you were going. I was trying to figure out a way that I could get exposure to Aaron Rye this week. I tried to find a potential matchup opponent that I could take him on against. I thought the Akshay Bhatia stuff was interesting. Unfortunately, that number kind of started ballooning out over the past 24 hours, and I don't love where the prices are now with it. You're more in that like minus 120, minus 125 range at a lot of these shops. I don't have any Rye exposure for that reason, and it might be one of those spots to where, you know, he wins the golf tournament and I'm sitting there and I got boxed out of the matchups and I made a decision of my own not to bet him in the outright. And I mean, I guess you could consider him as like some sort of a safety target in one of these placement bets. But for me, the problem with Horschel is that any of the weighted proximity stuff is going to be alarming in a model. And that's kind of one of the things that drew him a little bit lower in my sheet. But Horschel is a golfer that if you throw him at one of these club down venues, you put a little bit of weather that might come into play. And I know that same answer for Justin Rose, technically, who I already have a fade against in a matchup, but I think Horschel is more so trending in the right direction. When he missed the cut at the Scottish Open, I had Alexander Bjork over him, and it was a miscut versus miscut battle. And unfortunately, we were on the wrong end of that. I was not shocked to see Horschel miss the cut. We got to the Open Championship, and you know, we always talk, Roberto, where a lot of times there shouldn't be massive discrepancies that occur from week to week, but the one discrepancy that does occur is where you grade a course differently, even if it's just marginally differently than the week before. And Horschel all of a sudden became one of my favorite plays on the board at the Open Championship. I thought he was a good placement bet. I thought he was worth considering in matchups. Thought he was a great DFS play on top of everything else there. Wasn't shocked to see him find success. I'd probably give a very similar answer this week to where really good course fit for him. Not necessarily a golfer I'm looking to take on, but I do think you're right just as far as a value answer goes, that if push came to shove and I had to bet one of the sides, even if it was even money both ways, I would rather have Aaron Rice. So give me a couple points and you're probably on the right side there.
Yeah, I think you said it best when he should probably be minus 105, and me just seeing the plus 105, I was just kind of startled to see that, but I don't think I have enough of an edge to punch a ticket. So I'm going to lay off there. I have one other bet that I want to workshop with you in a moment, but I skip one that I actually am betting, and that's Steven Yeager, 61st or better in the placement in the player finishing markets on Bet365. This is minus 120 juice. You can get it on either side, over under 60.5. He has 2 top 15 finishes in each of his last 2 appearances at the Wyndham Championship. And he overall grades out really strongly from tee to green. He's 14th in this field in strokes gained putting. He is an unmitigated disaster. However, he has some reason for optimism on Bermuda. Like we mentioned earlier in the show during our course preview, he's a guy who grew up in Tennessee. Yeah, he represented Germany last week. Went to the same high school, I think, as he went to the same high school as Harris English out there in Chattanooga. And he went to Chattanooga, shot the Mocs. But I love Steven Yeager for 61st or better just because he's got too much talent to be here. I think you have him in the low 40s in your model in terms of your player grades for the week. The putter is going to be the big differentiator for him. I know you have him 15th for Donald Ross history for whatever that is. For whatever that is worth, he had a strong result at the US Open, his only top 30 finish in his last 7 starts, where he tied for 21st. And just going back, all of his recent top 25 finishes over the last 3 months have been on Bermuda courses. I think there's some reason for optimism there, and there's a chance to buy the dip on Steven Yeager. So this is one of my favorite bets of the week. Just make the cut, Steven Yeager, and we're probably going to cash. And we can probably survive another unmitigated disaster on the greens. But the Bermuda grass does give some reason for optimism there. So if you wanted to push him farther up the board for a top 20, I think there's the upside there. I think, obviously, we think he can win. I didn't get to bet him because I was calling the tournament at the Houston Open, but I used him for one and done that week and love Houston Yeager there. I know, Spencer, you cashed in there. So thoughts on Steven Yeager, a guy that you've been higher on than basically anybody else in the golf betting industry that I can think of?
I'm inside the top 50 in all 3 iterations of my model. I guess if we wanted to go to the con end of, I think you named a lot of the pros of the reasons why Yeager makes a lot of sense. And even at that number being outside the top 60 there, like it starts becoming very intriguing. The negative marks inside of my model, if we are trying to find any of those, fairways gained at short courses, he's outside of the top 100 in that area. He also struggles, and this is way too exact. It's inside of my model because I want everybody to look at specific ranges. I always go through and I reproject it specifically for the course that's going to be played. So anybody who uses my model, if you see par 4 scoring from 400 to 450 yards, and you see somebody's output there, and then all of a sudden for the weighted scoring, if they jump up further than where you would expect them to, that's because I've added some stuff in for some course-specific answers with it. The thing that worries me about Yeager, though, 138th in my model, that is the number that I wouldn't necessarily take at face value just because there's so many different courses and examples, and not every single hole that lands at 401 yards is exactly what grades as if it lands at 449, and not every single 420-yard hole in general is going to be like the next one. So, I put that in just as, here's a general blueprint, here is what they do, and then I go in for the weighted grade and take the course-specific answer. Yeager only managed to jump up in that area to 106th from par 4 scoring between 400 to 450 yards. We look at what he's done at this course, 2 high-end finishes, 1 missed cut over the past 5 years. I tend to agree that I think you are correct. He probably lands inside and makes the cut and gets himself into a top 60 payday. I just don't think it comes without risk. But, in general, Roberto, a lot of these wagers, books are very savvy. And I don't think there's massive discrepancies in a lot of these areas. Like, prices move up and down based off of pretty much where they're supposed to be. You might get a couple spots of discrepancy. If you end up being correct on this and Yeager hits with the high-end marks, and that's where I agree with you. Like, I think from a high-end answer here, Yeager is super intriguing because he has legitimate top 10, top 20 sort of equity if he can put the pieces together. Maybe a little bit lower of a floor in this spot, but you could tell me right now, because I think this would be a very interesting answer, because I assume there's going to be a massive discrepancy, which is why I'm asking the question, and maybe I'm incorrect on this. What is Steven Yeager's price to come top 40 at, we'll just use Bet365 as the example?
So without ties, his top 40 price is plus 130.
That's more or less what I was anticipating it being. I thought it would be somewhere between plus 120 and plus 140 there. I mean, just based off the mathematical equation of where that number should be based off of where we've gotten it, I do think that there's value based off of that. And we've said this numerous times. I don't want to be quoted on this one because I don't know where the price is elsewhere. I will assume that top 40 price on Jaeger is probably the best number in the market. If not, it's very close to being the best number in the market. So I wouldn't be shocked if you found it at other places if it was worse than that number. And then all of a sudden, value wise, you can start even getting a little bit more value there. So I think it's a boom or bust sort of play. I think the price tag also shows it to be a boom or bust sort of play, but definitely upside numbers that make sense.
I think so. To the top 40 pricing, it's frustrating because only one other book has top 40 pricing up. So it is the best price in the market as of right now. But getting back to, as you noted earlier, Bet365 isn't afraid to put the numbers up early in the week. So greatly appreciate them. It would be a lot harder to have the show if they weren't up, because we wouldn't have half the bets we've named today. I punched that ticket at 61st or better. So hopefully Jaeger at least saves his blow up round for after Friday afternoon or after the second round, because I don't know if the second round is going to finish on Friday afternoon this week. But I have one other golfer I wanted to discuss with a bet that I was intrigued by. I think it's a little bit too rich for me. Patrick Fishburne, top 40, plus 137 with ties on Bet365. They have with ties and without ties available, by the way. This is plus 150 without ties. I was more intrigued by with ties, but here's a guy who is 32 years old on the PGA Tour in his rookie season. And he started off with missed cuts in 7 of his first 8 events. No top 40 finishes in that span. And you get to Punta Cana, ties for 23rd. And then, which Punta Cana is an opposite field event, so take that with a grain of salt. But then he gets to play with his childhood friend, Zach Blair, at the Zurich Classic of New Orleans. It's the classic duo of the super tall 6'2" Jack guy and the short, kind of chubby guy with the beard. And they're best of friends, the yin and the yang. They figure it out somehow. They got 71 holes into that tournament, right in the mix, and then spontaneous combustion. But still, top 4 finish. They tied for 4th. And then, since then, in his individual starts, missed the cut at the Byron Nelson, but top 25 finishes in 6 of 8 starts since then. 2 of those were in opposite field events. Yes, the 15th at the ESCO and the solo 3rd at the Barracuda Championship were opposite field events, so not against the best fields. But in his only missed cuts, both of them came right on the number. And in his other events, he's shown that he can gain over a stroke per round with his approach play. In his last 3 starts, he's averaged over a stroke per round gained in putting. And off the tee, he's an absolute bomber. He's not super accurate. So I don't know that he's the best fit for this golf course, but I thought that his upside was really interesting. And the form overall is surging. It looks like he's found his game. He's more comfortable at this level. He's got some starts guaranteed after being on the lower end of the Corn Ferry Tour. You're not sure when you're going to get to play. There's a lot of pressure adjusting to the PGA Tour level. He's really found himself. And like we mentioned with Eric Cole, he's 32 years old. He's a guy who knows his game. And I'm intrigued by the floor and the upside. I didn't have a great read on him, just given that we only have this year's data to really work with. I wanted to know what you thought about the top 40 bet. I haven't bet it. I don't know that I'm going to bet it, but I thought that he was somebody worth talking about.
Here's my concern, Roberto. We've landed in a spot with him where the number has moved. I don't mean specifically this week. I'm talking as a general rule of thumb here over the last 2 months. And we can even stretch this down to, let's just say from his last 4 tournaments, you have 3 top 25 finishes from him, what we've seen recently. This number has shrunk massively from where it would have been at a month ago, a month and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
You have to ask yourself the question, and I don't know what the answer is to this because there's such limited sample size of data that I even have. The par 5 scoring looks great. There are some high-end metrics in his profile that, back-to-back top 10 finishes, he might be able to continue it. I always worry in these spots that you're buying in on the high of where the number is, which ends up being the low of where the price has moved to with it. That would be my only concern with it. As far as what the number shows and what my model has, it's very close to proper one way or another. If I run it with a little bit more of a statistical profile, probably doesn't have the value. If I run it with the actual current form metric attached to it, which is where he climbs in my model, then all of a sudden it does have value based off of that price. It's probably a stay away for me because I just worry in these spots that you're buying in on a price where the market is like, to me, that's a respect of the market at that number right there. And maybe it ends up being correct, and sportsbooks are very savvy that they didn't, put him out there at even the Ben Silverman price. Like, Silverman doesn't have exactly those high-end finishes, but Silverman and Fishburne, to me, are very equivalent in what expectations should be this week. You can tell me I can get 165, give or take points higher. That's what pushes me more in the direction of Silverman there, where because there's been a lack of quote unquote high end upside from one, where the other one is providing high end upside, the numbers have gone too far in both directions.
Yeah, that's why I laid off of it. I like the other prices a lot more with the plus 200, plus 225s with Silverman and Chandler Phillips. And so I think that Fishburne has legitimate upside to win. I think he's long enough. I think the driver and the putter give me a lot of confidence that he can win. And the iron play showing signs of life recently, I think is very intriguing. Maybe somebody we look at more in the FedEx Cup fall, because I just know that with him being 101st in the FedEx Cup standings, unless he wins or finishes solo second this week, probably not going to have a chance to bet him in the next couple of weeks, but not going to force anything on him. So we'll hang out and wait probably for the FedEx Cup fall, but somebody who I think is intriguing, and hopefully he stays on the PGA Tour and gets to bet him next year. Spencer, I wanted to move to one and done, unless you have any other plays on your card. Do you have any matchups or anything else?
Well, I had a matchup that unfortunately has moved. I'll give what it was, but this number is long gone from where it's at. So I took Ben Griffin plus 140 over Akshay Bhatia. That number has now moved to plus 100, minus 130 on the Bhatia side of it. Here's what I want everybody to think of for Griffin. And there's a lot of other ways to play Griffin, which is why I'm even going to bring up this discussion right now. I think you can consider him as a top 40 bet in that like plus 135 range. I think you could work up the board a little bit further than that and try to bet him as a top 20. I would even go as far as to say, and this is not a market that you usually find me in trying to lay juice, I thought Griffin to make the cut at minus 150 was a really intriguing value. There's a lot of different ways that you can try to find a way to get exposure to him. So here's the reason why I like him. There's been 26 rounds that he's played since his last appearance on Bermuda surface. So I looked, because I was curious, what has he done with the putter in the last 26 appearances of rounds that he's played on non-Bermuda? And then just for the sake of comparison, which is going to push you back to the end of 2023, I just want everybody to be aware of that. You're not just getting results from the season. How has Griffin performed when only faced with Bermuda surfaces with the putter over 26 rounds? Figure the same sample size of the amount of rounds will give a better indication of what I'm trying to express here. So look at what he's done on Bermuda in those 26 rounds with the putter. He's gained 25.2 strokes putting. Look at what he's done in the non-Bermuda opportunities, negative 3.75 strokes putting. You're looking at a discrepancy there that is just under 29 strokes difference between a Bermuda facility and a non-Bermuda facility. I think Griffin, and you didn't hear him on my outright card, which is where I found every way to try to get to him. We always say we can't bet everybody. I ended up pushing him to the side of that market. But as I said, whether it's a placement bet, it's a made cut bet, probably not going to find too many numbers in the market where you're going to get great matchup prices with him. You might be able to find something at one of your specific books. Griffin is one of my favorite value plays on the board. I'm going to use him in DFS this week. there are just certain golfers, and it doesn't happen for every single event, but there are certain golfers that when they go to POA, they are better than expectation than anywhere else. They go to Bentgrass, they're better than expectation than anywhere else. This is the prime example of a golfer being better on a specific surface, but the industry, maybe as a whole, as the market here, not necessarily giving him that credit when we look at some of the recent miscuts that he's leading into the event. I just think this is perfect spot, right course, ideal profile to where, I mean, he's 80-1 out there when he opened on Monday. I don't know what the best price is right now. I'm almost sitting here. I don't really have room on my card, and I'm trying not to add somebody else, but I keep pushing myself in this direction to where I really want to find a way to get Griffin because he is an upside climber. It might just end up being that I go a little bit overweight with making the cut, the matchup I have, a placement bet, and then we call it a day there.
You can find him at 80-1 in the enhanced win market at Bet365. And yeah, looking at his results on Bermuda versus non-Bermuda, it's staggering. And also of note, last year at the Chicken Championship, the Sanderson Farms in October, he tied for second there and had one of his best putting results. I'll call it his best putting result of his career because his only two better ones came on courses where we don't have 4 rounds of data, and that one we have 4 rounds of data. So I'm going to call that his best result, where he gained over 8 strokes putting on Bermuda surface, and he also gained over 6 strokes with his irons and had, I think, a 7-footer for birdie, or for 7-footer to win the tournament on the last hole that lipped out. And Spencer, I think you were on him that week too.
I mean, this is the consensus of the show, Roberto, is find the worst losses that you can have this season. And that's, I also had, I don't think this one is, I don't think these are as bad. I'll just throw them out there now that we're going down this path. I had Oberg at the Scottish. I did add McIntyre. So, take that one for what it's worth. I had Cantlay earlier at the year at, what was that? The Genesis, where he entered Sunday with, multiple shot lead there and didn't get across the finish line. He got sick. Things didn't work out. There's been a lot of bad examples of that. And that's where, even when we talk about results, like it's been an up and down year, and it's still a very close end to where there's slight profit being shown. And that's the positive end of it. But, I can think about 5 or 6 outrights that just turn the season upside down, where there's, hit half of those and it's an extra 20 units of profit going to the bankroll.
The margins are so thin in golf, and it can be infuriating, but sometimes you get some lucky breaks, and you just got to keep sticking to the plan. And eventually, if your plan's worth it, it'll work out. And so I have confidence that ours is. I thought the Rom bet was a great bet last week. And even though I was thinking about betting Scheffler, I think that the Rom bet was a way better bet, and Scheffler is just inevitable. Also, on the Ben Griffin Sanderson Farms note, I stand in solidarity with you as somebody who has been who has gotten a Luke-less putt to the eye hole, as in the other time he won a tournament on the PGA Tour, I had Will Zalatoris, and Luke-less comes from out of nowhere to win at Torrey Pines a couple years ago. Spencer, let's talk one and done. I've got Sung J M, 2 guys ahead of me in our Action Network pool. Don't have him available, so it's very simple. We touched on him. That's who I'm playing. Who are you playing this week in one and done?
If I had them available and I was front running a contest, I would play Sung Jae. I don't have Sung Jae available. My second choice would probably be, I talked about the boomer bust nature of Harman. I would probably go to Harman, though, in almost any spot, just because of the upside profile he has. I find myself in a position where I don't have any of those names. It'll probably be either Eric Cole or Ben Griffin that I inevitably end up using.
Those are the only 2 golfers in the top half of this field that I've really looked at who are both below average in driving distance and driving accuracy. So shout out to those 2 guys for being so good that they can A, have a PGA Tour card while doing that, and B, being as great as they are. I know that Ben Griffin was the only golfer in the top 50 of last year's FedEx Cup standings who was below average in both of those statistics, which is just remarkable. Spencer, where can the people find your work this week?
Yeah, you can find all my in-tournament information over at Action Network. You can get my model at Rotoballer, and I should have a Wednesday article here for Action Network where I will break down whatever, either if there's a round 1 matchup, we'll go over that, or we'll go a little bit more of where the odds have moved on the outright board.
Awesome. I know you've had quite a few recent winners featured in your DraftKings article or your DFS article on Wednesdays, including Bobby Mack in recent weeks. So excited to check that out. You can find me on Twitter/X at Roberto8213. You can find our third podcast member, Nick Bretwish, at Sticks Picks. He's out on vacation this week, but we'll hope to have him back next week for the first round of the FedEx Cup playoffs at the St. Jude's in Memphis. So that'll be a lot of fun as we get down to 70 players. Unfortunately, probably no top 40 market, but our outright cards we'll dive into once again as we try to avoid the inevitable Scotty Scheffler. Big thanks to everybody who makes this podcast possible, especially our producers, Matt Mitchell, Noah Niederhofer, and David Payne. Big thanks to everybody who supports our show, especially everybody who hates on Wyndham Clark. People did not like the Wyndham Clark pick last week, but he showed signs of life the last 3 weeks. Shout out to Wyndham Clark. I'm going to play him in one and done at the BMW Championship, so he'll turn it around by then. But big thanks to everybody who makes this podcast possible. Big thanks to our fans. Tell a friend, tell an enemy, tell everybody. Shout out to people on YouTube who watch us there. And big thanks to everybody, once again, who makes this podcast possible. And we'll see you guys next week for the FedEx Cup playoffs.